In 2015, Emily Mitchell, a 32-year-old fitness enthusiast from San Francisco, began running at sunrise to enjoy the tranquility of the early morning hours. Her path took her along the serene Golden Gate Park trails where the trees stood tall, casting long shadows on the foggy paths. She loved the solitude, the calming sounds of her breath and footsteps, and the sense of freedom as the city slept. But one particular morning, that peace would be shattered forever. It was a cool morning in November when Emily decided to run a longer route, stretching her usual path to the more remote sections of the park. The fog was thick and the morning mist clung to the trees, making everything appear otherworldly. The park was eerily quiet, and Emily felt a strange sense of unease, but she shrugged it off. She had run here countless times without incident, and the familiar path was supposed to comfort her. As she jogged deeper into the park, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was no one. Just the same fog, the same empty trail. Trying to calm her nerves, Emily picked up her pace, pushing forward. But every time she glanced back, she thought she saw something moving in the fog, just beyond her sight. A shadow, perhaps. At one point, she stopped to catch her breath, taking a sip of water. That's when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her, but they weren't matching her pace. They were quicker, heavier, and more deliberate. She turned around in a panic, her heart pounding in her chest. Again, no one was there. Just the faintest trace of movement in the thickening fog, a silhouette that didn't belong. She told herself it was nothing. A jogger, perhaps, behind her in the mist. But the footsteps grew closer, and with each step, Emily's heart began to race. She turned and ran again, faster now, the sound of the footsteps following her, always just behind her. The eerie echo of another set of footsteps mirrored her own, but when she glanced over her shoulder again, there was still nothing but mist. Out of breath and terrified, Emily found herself at the edge of the park near a large open field. She slowed down to catch her breath, looking around in desperation for any sign of the figure that had been chasing her. But there was no one. No one except the heavy, unnatural silence of the park. And then she heard it again, whispers, low and indistinct. They seemed to come from all directions, but she couldn't make out the words. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Emily's mind raced as she scanned the area. It was as if the world had stopped moving, except for the unsettling whispers that now filled the air. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. A sharp, cold breeze rushed past her, and the whispers grew louder. Emily's legs gave way, and she fell to her knees in sheer terror. Her breath formed visible clouds in the freezing air. In that moment, she saw something that would haunt her forever, a shadow, tall and thin, standing just a few feet away from her. It was human-shaped, but there was something grotesque about its outline, as if it were not fully there, not fully solid. The figure's face was obscured, but Emily could feel its presence, cold and malicious, pressing down on her. It whispered her name, Emily. The voice was distorted, like it was coming from deep within the earth. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to her feet and bolted towards the park exit. She ran with everything she had, the footsteps chasing her, echoing in the fog, never growing more distant. By the time Emily reached the main road, the sun had fully risen and the fog was starting to dissipate, but the fear remained. The footsteps had stopped. When Emily finally stopped to catch her breath, she turned to look back at the park entrance. The path she had just run down was completely empty. No one was there, but she still felt the weight of that presence, lingering, watching from the shadows. She never jogged in Golden Gate Park again, and to this day, she never runs alone. In 2012, Mark Davidson, a 40-year-old businessman from Raleigh, North Carolina, enjoyed running along the trails of the nearby Pullen Park. The park was vast and covered in dense woods, a quiet escape from the demands of his everyday life. Most mornings, Mark would run alone, starting before sunrise to catch the crisp morning air and avoid the crowds. He had always felt safe on these trails, but that would change on one fateful morning. One morning in late September, Mark set off on his usual jog at around 5:30 a.m. The sky was still dark, and the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the trail. The stillness of the park was unsettling, but Mark was accustomed to it. As he passed the first-mile marker, he began to feel a tinge of discomfort. It was as if the trees were closing in on him, their branches creaking in the wind. The path ahead seemed darker than usual. As he continued running deeper into the woods, Mark heard the distinct sound of twigs snapping behind him. He turned, expecting to see another runner or perhaps a deer, but there was nothing, just the dense, dark woods. He dismissed it as his imagination and kept running, but the sound persisted, echoing through the trees. Mark's pace quickened and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the woods. A man, tall and disheveled, stepped onto the trail ahead of him, blocking his path. His clothes were torn and his face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. Mark slowed to a stop, confused and wary. "Can I help you?" Mark called out, but the man didn't answer. Instead, he stared at Mark, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if in a trance. Mark took a step back, but the man didn't move. The air felt colder now, the once familiar path now drenched in an oppressive silence. Suddenly, the man took a step toward him, his eyes never leaving Mark's. Mark could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as the man whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The voice was raspy and strained, like it had not been used in years. Mark turned to run, but the man grabbed his arm with an unnatural strength. Mark tried to pull away, but the grip tightened. He screamed, but the man's hand clamped over his mouth, muffling his cries. Then, Mark heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind him. "Leave him alone." It sounded like a woman's voice, filled with desperation. Before Mark could react, the man let go, and with a sudden shove, Mark was thrown to the ground. The man vanished into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as if he had never been there. Mark, shaken and breathless, stood up and ran as fast as he could, his legs burning with fear. He made it back to the park entrance, but when he looked behind him, he saw nothing, no man, no figure, no sign that anything had happened. The park seemed peaceful again, the morning sunlight beginning to filter through the trees. But the image of the man's hollow eyes and the strange woman's voice haunted him for years. Mark never ran in Pullen Park again. He couldn't. He never spoke of that morning to anyone, but every time he passed the park, he could feel that same presence, lurking in the shadows waiting.